Welcome to the Existential Empath Podcast. My name is Tanya, and I am an intuitive empath. My intention is to share valuable tips, tools, and techniques that I have learned so you can tap into your own inner healer naturally and intuitively. Welcome back, everyone. Today I have a special guest. I have Michael Spremulli. Michael is an astrologer with more than 30 years of experience interpreting astrology charts. He founded Blue Ridge Astrology with the intention to provide both a unique and practical approach to astrology. He combines his expertise as a therapist and workplace personality expert with modern and scientifically validated astrology techniques. Welcome, Michael. It's a pleasure to have you on the show today.
Thanks so much for having me. It's great to be here.
So, astrology is a language that helps us navigate self-discovery and personal growth. And there are many different types of astrology. Actually, about a month ago, I had a guest on the show talking about Vedic astrology.
Sure.
But today, Michael, you and we're going to talk about vibrational astrology. And so, Michael, how did your journey with astrology begin, and what types of astrology do you specialize in?
Sure. So I came to astrology in a roundabout way. Between my undergraduate and graduate year of study, was working someplace, wasn't having too great of a time trying to figure out what my life, the next steps were in life. And someone who I worked with gifted me a reading with a professional astrologer, which I have never had before. I've always had an interest in things spiritual, metaphysical. I'd studied hypnosis in school and a whole bunch of things that kind of run along that path. But I was a little hesitant because I was brought up in a faith-based system where astrology was a big no-no. If you do that, you're, headed toward who knows where you end up. Well, after feeling torn for about, a day and a half, I said, I'm going to have the reading. And it was an eye-opening experience. There were no goat sacrifices. There was no incense. There was nothing woo-woo. It was just a lovely middle-aged woman in Hollywood, Florida, of all places. I went to her home office, and she proceeded to tell me all the factors that had led up to where I'm at right now, at that point, what was going on in my life currently, and then gave me some timing that I could expect down the road. And this was all from just 3 pieces of information: my birth date, time, and location. Wow. And at that point, it was like, wow, there's something to this, because it was so much more specified than what people tend to assume astrology is when you look at the horoscopes in the newspaper and online. I said, there's got to be something to this. Well, the problem ensued then when I went to graduate school, where they try to beat anything out of you that can't really be proven through a scientific experiment. But that didn't quell my desire to want to learn more and see what was going on. So I started studying. I started getting books and looking at stuff and reading different. The internet was just kind of coming online then. So I was starting to look at resources that were out there and available. In the early 2000s, I acquired some professional astrology software and then just started doing some interpretations for friends and family, just kind of for, fun, because it was interesting. And people were like, wow, this is crazy. How can you get all this from just looking at these placements on an astrological chart? And long story short, that kind of evolved into me doing sort of some underground astrology for almost 20 years, where I'd have a client base. I never advertised. I never did any promotion. It was all word of mouth. And people would come to me once or twice a year to get an update on timing with regards to what's happening in the sky and how that impacts them. So that's all great. But remember, I was being trained as a clinician. I got a master's in clinical psych, emphasis on personality and intellectual assessment. And, for all those years, while I kind of have this quiet astrology thing going, I'm in the workplace looking at personality assessments to help companies hire the right people. Well, then about 2.5 years ago, I stumbled upon vibrational astrology. And then that was like the match to the kerosene, because VA is the only form of astrology that exists today that is an evidence-based practice. So what that means in English is there's actually research data behind it to back up its claims. The same methods of study that are used in genetic testing, such as extreme case sampling and a variety of other techniques, are used in VA to validate these concepts. And we'll get into a little bit as to how VA is different compared to other models, but I want to put it out there. I'm not saying VA is better than all the others. As you mentioned at the top, there are many different systems of astrology. You've got Vedic, you've got Western, you've got sidereal, you've got medieval, Hellenistic. There's probably 30 different subsets.
Wow,
And all
I had no
have,
idea.
there's a whole bunch. And they all have their place, but the fact that I am able to then use a system now that has the scientific validation behind it really matched with my internal map, because I'm a data guy, which is why when I really started kind of putting this out there, I had people coming to me saying, "Oh, are you sure you know what you're doing? This might, reflect negatively on your corporate stuff." I said, "It doesn't matter." I said, "It's data. I've got data to show what's going on here." And I always knew that there was something to astrology, but now we're able to see exactly what's going on. And I was so grateful to connect with this cutting edge form of astrology that really has a very grounded and practical approach in the way that it operates. So that's kind of a long-winded answer to how I got to where I am today, but here I am.
That's amazing. And I love that you're bridging that gap between science and the metaphysical. Like you, Michael, I worked in healthcare for many years. So, working with physicians and nursing staff, they always wanted to see the science, right? And so when I started to learn about energy, I started to learn about EFT tapping, emotional freedom technique. And I love that there was science that backed it, because it gave me something, because I knew intuitively it was amazing and it worked really well, but I loved that there was science to back it. And so I want to talk about that today, and how, we are bridging these gaps between what some may think are the woo, and I don't even like that term,
I know
the metaphysical, but there's people out there that think, that's out there. But let's talk about vibrational astrology and how it differs from other ones, and how it really does bring in that scientific approach.
Sure. So with all other systems in astrology, it's based on an archetypal model. Saturn represents the father, the moon represents the mother, and all these other different factors that are at play with the different signs and houses. And that's cool. As you said, at an intuitive level, there's something to it. But VA is different. It's an energy model. We don't deal in archetypes. In other words, we look at what the planets are responsible for regulating. And that's where and by the way, I am not the developer of VA. All credit goes to David Cochran, who has been working on this theory since the early 1970s. And in the past 10 years, everything has coalesced. He has interviewed tens of thousands of people, going through their charts and collecting data, working on this whole theory of vibrational astrology, which is an extension of harmonic astrology or cosmobiology, if you want to look at the real history and lineage. But the way that this model differs compared to traditional models of astrology is each planet has a specific function, and it regulates a specific process. And when we have various planets that aspect, which simply means they form a particular angular distance, I don't want to get too much in the weeds here, the energies of those planets combine. So VA is truly an energy model. Everything is energy. And what we're finding is that the stuff that's coming out of physics now and quantum mechanics is exactly what the ancients have been saying all these years. Everything is energy. So in VA, we spend a lot more time looking at planets, their aspects, their midpoints, and we have some very hard and fast rules on interpretation. Because, as I said, I've been into astrology for close to 30 years, thereabouts, maybe a little over. And one of the things that I always had a hard time with is what I like to call the crowbar effect. Because nothing's 100%. I get that. I mean, in personality assessment, nothing's 100%. But it's always more than statistical chance. There's some predictability there. But in many astrology models, here's how something goes. It's like, well, we want to know about your career. Okay, great. Well, we look at the 10th house and see what's going on, which is traditionally representative of your career, your public facing career, at least for the world to see. Well, if someone doesn't have any planetary placements in that house, well, what do? The typical astrological response is, well, we got to look at the house ruler. Who's on the cusp of that house? Which sign is on that house? And who rules that sign from a planetary perspective? Before you know it, you're running all over the chart. You're chasing down all these things, desperately trying to make a connection. And that was the part that didn't work for me from the scientific background. It's like, nah, this is too much reaching. If there's nothing in the career section of the chart, obviously it doesn't mean you don't have a career, but there's got to be an alternative way to find that information. So VA, again, has very hard and fast rules based on the data that has been collected and analyzed. And I'll share some of those studies with you as we get into this, as far as what makes sense and what doesn't. And if it doesn't fit, it doesn't fit. You know, unlike the old OJ, you know, if the glove fits, you must acquit. No, if it doesn't fit, it doesn't fit. And the models,
Wizard of Oz.
yeah, and the models are always being refined because there's a ton of research being done. And there's even interest now, finally, in academia to actually look at some of this stuff, because any attempts in the past for academicians to study astrology have failed miserably for a couple of reasons. Number one, astrologers, for the most part, aren't interested in doing research. So collectively, as a species, we haven't done a great job of looking at things objectively, because what do astrologers do? We learn through books and through other astrologers. Well, this means that. Well, why? Well, this is the way it has been. And it just gets passed down and passed down. Well, I want to see where it came from. All right. So
you're an enigma.
We've got that piece, but then the other component related to, I totally lost my train of thought, but that happens. It'll come back. I forgot what I was saying, but I derailed there. So it'll resurface.
Yeah, it'll definitely resurface. And so,
it just did. See, energy. So the idea is with VA, with these specific rules and regulations as far as what makes sense and how there's defined meaning. So it's not, if, for example, a lot of people, everyone's familiar with the signs, Aries, Taurus, Cancer, all the way around the zodiac. So we'll do a quick little test here. When you think of the sign Leo, what type of characteristics come to mind?
Outgoing. They're a fire sign, very vibrant, very extroverted, extremely confident. Yeah.
Okay. I'm about to blow your mind. Because the research, that's what and you're spot on. You look in any traditional astrology going way back, and the signs really didn't start to have a whole bunch of meaning ascribed to them until around the 1800s-ish, somewhere in there. And that's the typical definition of Leo. But guess what? The research did not bear that out. Here's what Leo's all about from a VA perspective. Leo is about individuation, being an individual. Now, yes, sometimes that could be the fiery, bubbly, outgoing type of person who likes center stage and whatnot. But other times it could be the quiet person who's researching something in their basement for many, many years and working on a craft that isn't necessarily in the spotlight, but it sets them apart from everyone else. I see. And that's a big shift and a big pill for a lot of astrologers to swallow, saying, well, no, that's not true. Well, when they looked at extreme case samples of like super Leos, where someone's got a ton of Leo in their chart, multiple planets, maybe, Leo sitting on the ascendant or midheaven or what have you. And we look to see, are they this extroverted, gregarious, fiery person? The data didn't bear out that they were. Some people are, but not enough to make that definitive statement. And that's one example as far as, so when we're doing an interpretation and I'm looking at placements that might be in Leo, it's not, well, you're a fiery of this type. It's like you like to make your own mark and set yourself apart from everyone else. Because I know someone who's got 6 placements in Leo. 6 placements.
Wow.
And they're the most introverted person. And prior to the VA knowledge, it's like, now this makes sense. So VA has looked at objectively, what do the planets primarily And then and signs, what are the characteristics and impacts that these things have, and what do they not have? And in vibrational astrology, we place a lot more emphasis on planets. I could do a whole consultation and never mention a sign once. And I know people are like driving into the ditch now as they're hearing this because the planets are where it's at. Yeah, the signs color things and flavor things a little bit, but the data doesn't bear it out. Here's another one for you to chew on. They recently conducted a study of 20,000 married couples trying to predict if there was any predictability between what signs end up forming relationships with other signs for lifelong marriage, or, even a marriage until it may come to an end. What do you think the data suggested?
I don't know, because there's a lot out there about different, I know my sign, I'm an Aries, different signs and what you're compatible with. And I haven't always felt that way. So I'm curious to see what the data suggests.
The data showed nothing significant. You can't make any predictions based on signs as far as who's going to be attracted to who and what's going to work out. And this is on 20,000 cases. So this really is the cutting edge of astrology. And even though it's been in the works since 1972, now with the ability for astrologers such as myself to actually go into the Astro database, pull various theories together by looking at, well, what is it like if we have people who have these specific planets in a configuration? What do those people look like when we pull them up just based on the configuration and not cherry pick the data? It really opens up a whole new world. So for some folks, especially, old school astrologers, they may say, no. Well, again, I'm not trying to convince anybody of anything, but when I discovered this model and how this all comes together, it just makes sense from the research and science perspective. And that's why I love it.
That's amazing. And so, basically, what are horoscopes? Are they just BS belief systems?
Okay. So I'm glad you asked, because I do daily horoscopes, but they're completely different than probably 99% of what you see out there online. So let's talk about the horoscope in general. I equate astrological horoscopes to the junk food of the astrology world.
Yes.
And here's what I mean. We all like junk food. Donuts are my weakness, sweets, whatever the case is. And a little bit of junk food is good from time to time. We enjoy it. It's fun. It gives us a boost, but you don't want to make a steady diet of it. Mm-hmm. When we're looking at horoscopes, regardless of where they are, they, by design, have to be generalized. So if someone's doing a horoscope based on Aries, for example, they may look in the chart, in the transit chart, which simply means where the planets are moving around in the sky today, and what house, Aries may be in, and where things are connected, and what planets moving. But it's going to be super general, and it may give you a general theme for the day, maybe, or maybe not. Even the best horoscopes in the world can only give you a little taste of what's going on, because what makes it personal to us is where the planets are placed in our own charts. And those horoscopes are going to have some impact on some people more than others, depending on where the planets are placed. Now, the way I do horoscopes is a bit different. And you can find them on TikTok under Blue Ridge Astrology, and Facebook. There are multiple places. You just search for Blue Ridge Astrology, it'll come up. I do a daily vibrational astrology forecast where we're not talking about signs, because when we're talking about vibrations and energy, the idea is that each planet regulates this particular process and operates on a certain energetic frequency. So when these different frequencies come together through aspects, we're getting a different type of energy that's at play. And that energy is going to impact all of us to some degree, but it's going to impact some people a lot more and other people a lot less. And it's much more applicable when we're looking at what aspects vibrationally, and that's a totally different set of criteria than, house cusps and signs and all that. And we're looking to see what is the dominant vibrational energy pattern in the sky today. And then that's what I do a brief, 1.5, 2-minute video on. And here's my take. I think horoscopes are fun. I read every one of them that comes across my desk. But if you make any major life decisions based on a horoscope, you're an idiot. I can't explain it any more clearly than that. You can't. I mean, that's just the bottom line. They're fun. And a lot of times horoscopes are, wow, that just landed directly in my lap as far as what I'm dealing with. Sometimes not. So I think they have a place. It helps get people introduced to astrology. I know from people seeing my vibrational forecasts out there, I get comments on TikTok. Wow, that landed square in what I was dealing with today. Now, I don't know, obviously, what's going on in the natal chart of that person, but if it landed squarely, I could guarantee you that if we ran their chart and compared that against the aspects of the day, there'd be some overlap between what's happening in the sky and how that's completing these circuits in the person's natal chart. So I think, horoscopes are fun, but don't over rely on them. If you're going to make any major life decisions, you need to seek out a professional astrologer who actually gets into your natal chart and really dives deep.
Yeah. And speaking of vibration and planets, we've had some planetary alignments this month, right? So at least that's what I've been reading. So is there anything that you could speak about that? What is going on in the skies right now?
So there's a lot of stuff going on. I don't have the transits pulled up right now. I think last night's forecast that I did for today, and see, here's the thing. So it's like, well, what's going on? Well, does that mean at a daily level, weekly level, or a monthly level? Because it varies.
Moment, right?
Exactly. So, the general theme that I've been seeing now, and again, this is from a VA perspective, so this is going to sound probably a little different than what most of your listeners are used to hearing. There's been quite a bit of activity with Neptune being aspect to other things, and Neptune is the planet that regulates what is magical to us. That could be going to the Super Bowl, going to see Taylor Swift. It could be vacationing in the south of France. It could be becoming a best-selling, whatever like is like, oh, that is just ideal. And when Neptune gets involved with other planets, it brings that magic into reality. So for example, I think, and again, I'm doing this from memory, I think when I looked at last night's vibrational forecast for today, I believe Neptune, Mars, and Venus were all aspecting. So what that means when we say aspect, that means those planets are combining each of their energies together, almost like recipes, ingredients in a cake or a recipe. And dependent on the configuration of planets and what planets are active, that sets the energetic tone of the day. And here's what I mean by that. Astrology doesn't dictate our actions. People who say that, well, you can't do that, especially if you're involved with a faith-based system. No, you're not worshiping astrology. It's like a weather report. It's just a cosmic weather report. Mm-hmm. So these energy patterns that come into play give us a tone for the day. So let's take that one, for example, Venus, Mars, and Neptune. That's all about Venus is what we're attracted to. Okay. So Venus is not necessarily romance. Romance and affectionate relationships rolls up into there, but Venus regulates what we are attracted to. So when that's involved with Neptune, that's going to give energy to the whole idea of whatever it is that is magical to us and give that a little bit of a boost. And with Mars in there, traditionally Mars is defined as the warrior and whatnot. Mm-hmm. And that's not really accurate. Mars gives us a drive from a VA perspective. Again, I want to be very respectful for other forms of astrology. I'm certainly not saying that this is the only way to do things. But in VA, what the data has shown is that Mars gives us the desire to do something. So when we put all three of those planets together, Mars, Venus, Neptune, that is an optimal time to seize on the energy to go and do something that you want to do. Maybe it's not as grand as going to see Taylor Swift or go to the Super Bowl, but maybe it's, hey, I really want to read this book. Reading is very relaxing to me. It's been on my desk. Well, today's a good day to do it if that's something that's been on your list to do, because how many times we sit down to read and we just can't get into something. You got distractions, you got things popping up in our head. So with that example, it's an ideal day to seize that energy that you're feeling from Mars, let yourself be pulled in the direction of where you want to go and what is magical to you. And that sets the stage for things to flow freely. Conversely, there may be days when the energy isn't optimal. Let's say you want to make a big announcement about your business, or go online and announce a marketing campaign or something. And Saturn is aspecting a lot of planets. And by the way, in vibrational astrology, there are no good or bad planets. I know Saturn gets a bad rap.
Yeah, Saturn does get a bad rap.
The big malefic. That's not what it is. In VA, Saturn simply strips things down to the essential core. In other words, the research shows that when Saturn gets involved, it cuts out all the fluff, all the noise. We may get a little upset because Saturn can take away our toys, but it helps us focus on what is essential. So you probably wouldn't want to make a major announcement if Saturn is aspecting a lot of things that don't involve necessarily putting things out into the world. So let's say Saturn aspects Mercury, and Mercury regulates our thought process. That actually might be positive because it might help you focus on your core message. But Saturn is typically, by nature, it distills things down. You'd much rather want to make an announcement that goes out into the world when Jupiter's involved, because Jupiter, and this definition is fairly similar and consistent with other types of astrology, whatever Jupiter comes in contact with, it makes bigger, it expands. Now, that could be for good or for bad.
Depending, where the energy's going. Yeah.
It depends on where the energy is going. So that's a little glimpse as to how we look at things from a transitory perspective. And then we were chatting before we came online here about the Schumann resonance.
Yeah, let's talk about the Schumann. For those of you out there in the conscious community, you've been seeing the charts, and there's been showing sacred geometry in the actual data. And so I had asked Michael if he could speak about this based off of VA and the data and see what comes through.
So I'm not an expert on Schumann by any means, but there was a distinct overlap that I saw when I started to see the videos that people were posting and how the waveforms were functioning. That whole idea of the sacred geometry based on energy patterns, that's the core of VA. It really is. So if nothing else, the Schumann resonance helps us get an idea as to, this kind of shines a light on how these other planets may be forming these vibrations that we can't see or physically feel. Most of them. I mean, some of them you can feel the energy from the sun when you go outside because it's hot. Okay. Well, just because we can't feel Pluto's energy by stepping outside, it has a very distinct energy pattern. And when Pluto gets involved, there's this compulsion, almost obsession with whatever it comes in contact with. So there is, I think, a tremendous amount of overlap with the Schumann resonance elements and how that plays out in VA, because in the end, it's all energy. And that's what makes this system of astrology, I think, not only so attractive to me, but to be able to actually carve out and see how are these planetary energies impacting society as a whole, us as individuals, because we live in an energetic system. So Schumann is certainly, when I saw those patterns, I said, oh, look at that. I said, that's just like we talk about in VA, because in VA, we divide the astrology chart into various vibrations or harmonics. So the original term was harmonic, studied, and this theory was put together in the early 70s. And then beyond that, it switched into the vibrational world. But, typically when we look at charts, we have these aspects, which are specific angular distances. A conjunction is when two planets are sitting together within a certain degree of allowable orb or distance. Oppositions are when they're apart from each other on the wheel. You've got trines, you've got sextiles. Okay, so there's about 6 or 8 primary aspects in the way that we divide the astrological chart up. In vibrational astrology, we have vibrations which go beyond those initial 6. The first 32 vibrations, which means we cut the chart into 32 slices of pie, theoretically, and each of those vibrations, if you think of those as containers, they tell us about different aspects of life. For example, the 7th vibration, whatever's happening in that for an individual, tells us where we're going to spend our focus and how we're going to focus our behavior on certain things. And if we don't get to do that internal introspective focus that's active in that 7th vibe, the energy becomes blocked. We become unhappy. At worst, at best, and at worst, you can end up getting sick, dysfunctional,
Yeah.
because you're not able to do what you need to do. The ninth vibration is all about community. So we're dividing the astrological wheel up into 9 slices of pie. So things that are happening there relate to how you end up wanting to connect with the community. And a community could be you and your spouse, but more often it's more connecting to the greater. So that could be work community, faith-based community, people who you live with in your physical community. And the things that happen there are not for self-serving purposes, but to expand out. So the whole, and here's the thing, the first 32 harmonics have a tremendous amount of research behind them. New research is being conducted every month as they explore these higher harmonics. And here's the general rule of thumb. Let's say you don't have something happening in a lower harmonic, but it may be existing in a multiple of that. So for example, and I don't want to get too technical here, so pull me back if I'm getting too far into the weeds. The 8 vibration tells us about really the essence or the core of a person, but we can take octaves of that vibration, just like in music. So 8 times 8 is 64. If we look at the 64th vibration, even though we don't have a real clear understanding of what's going on there, it's a multiple of that self vibration that is an 8. And things that are happening there tend to be more mental, more cerebral. The lower vibrations, 1 to 32, we're seeing that things tend to manifest themselves more physically with a more outward appearance.
Oh.
And we're just getting started. I mean, there's multiple research teams. I'm involved with one of them, and there's many that are happening where we're looking at things and studying these different vibrations to see what configurations exist out there based on extreme case sampling. And what that means is we're not going out and finding people, oh, this person looks like that they would have this vibration, and put them in the data set. No, what we do is we say, well, we want to look at the 11th vibration, and we want to see who comes up in this 90,000 person database where we have the astrological date, time, and location of people. Who comes up if we say, well, we want to see what happens when the moon and the sun and Mars all aspect together in the 11th vibration. We set the software up to go do its data dive, and then we see what the software pulls up. And then we go and look at the biographies of those people to get an idea is there any similarities between what we see from one person to the next, to the next, to the next. And if there is, we look further. If there's not, then that was a guess that is not going to go too far. And then you move on to the next thing. So it's a never-ending journey.
It sounds it. And so when you're doing an astrological interpretation for someone, is it based off their lifetime or in the now moment where they are when you're doing that reading?
That's an excellent question. The first time someone comes to me, I like to look at their overall key vibrational charts. There are certain ones that we pull for every reading. We can't comment on all of them or we'd be there forever. But we look at like 5 core vibrational charts just to kind of set the stage on where this person has come from, where they've been, and to look at how is the energy optimally designed to flow based on their birth chart. Because that's the name of the game with VA in a nutshell. All it shows us is what is the optimal energy flow. And remember, we're dealing with actual flow of energy, not archetypes. Archetypes are born out of what energy patterns display, and they help us tell the story. But in VA, the moon does not represent your mother. That's not, it's energy. Now, if you want to use that to tell a story, as far as nurture and typical type of things that you would think of, that's fine, but that's not what it's measuring. So we'll start there, and then I always ask someone, "What do you want to focus on?" Because when I hold someone's chart in my hands, at least digitally,
there's a lot to look at.
It's like you've got their whole life there. It's like going to, this is a bad analogy, but it'll work. It's like going to a doctor and saying, "I'm sick, fix me."
Yeah, it's like I'm getting the impression of it's like going to Disney World and saying, what area do you want to go to? It's like you have all these locations and you're like, exactly. I want to go specifically to this location.
So when folks, end up on my doorstep or, my digital doorstep, they say, hey, I'd like, because, I have a pretty thorough intake process where I just ask people to say, what do you want to talk about? I don't want to spend 20 minutes talking about romance if you're wanting to know how to grow your business.
Yeah.
So we'll look at where the person's natal chart is set up and the vibration charts that are based off of that natal chart, because your natal chart never changes. I'm sure you know that because you've dealt with it. And I like to think of the natal chart as like our serial number. That's us. And there is no one else in this world who has the exact same natal chart with all the same placements, even if you're born the same day. And I know that's hard to conceptualize for those who haven't looked into astrology before, but the planets are always moving. So 3 people born on the same day within 3 minutes apart, there are some nuanced differences, especially when you get up into the higher vibrations. So I'll look at that, see where we're going, and then I'll look at transits, which are the planets that are moving around in the sky, and those aspect the various placements in the natal chart. And if you think of those as circuitry that gets connected when the aspects come by, that gives us an idea of what energy we can expect to feel during certain time frames. So, usually after that first one, if people are coming to me for timing updates, then we'll focus on the here and now, or they'll say, hey, 6 months from now, I've got a vacation planned. Can you tell me, what the general tone's going to be? And we can look and see what's going on in the sky then. I like to joke around and say that as astrologers, we're one of the few people who can very easily travel backwards and forwards in time on a daily basis, because you can look, we know where the planets are going to be in the sky. It's not random. It is highly calculable. Mm-hmm. So we can fast forward 10 years or go back 10 years and see what was going on in someone's life then. If they say, this feels just like it felt 10 years ago. Well, the first thing I'm doing, I'm pulling those transits from 10 years ago to see what was going on and see if they're similar to what's happening in the sky now. And a lot of times they are. And then that gives us some ideas to what's driving that, and then when things are going to change.
Yeah. And so I have a question. I've had people ask me this before, so it's your birth date, your time, and your location. What if someone doesn't have the time or the location? How do you do a reading?
Well, if you don't know where you were born, then you probably got bigger problems than
unless you were like, say, an orphan or, adopted or something along those lines.
So those are personally, I wouldn't work with someone who does, okay. So let's back up. The birth date obviously is essential. Location, 99% of the time, people can kind of have that. The tricky one is birth time.
Yes.
But it's also very important. So initially, it's like, I don't know what time I was born, but it's easier to discover your birth time than most people think. It's not always 100%, but what I always tell people is, number one, ask any parents or relatives that are still alive. Someone's going to remember. There's always someone in the family who likes to keep, I remember at 6:24 a.m. Okay, we check that. If that doesn't check out and you don't have a time, then we say, see if you can find your baby book, because most parents will write the birth time there. If that doesn't check out, you could actually request a birth certificate from the hospital where you were born. It may cost like $5 or something. And if they were recording the time, most hospitals do, they'll have it on the birth certificate. Now, in situations where we don't have a birth time, I can't do vibrational astrology. And depending on what the person wants to know about, I may refuse the consultation, or I say, look, I can give you some general information, but it's not going to be a full VA reading, because a difference of a few minutes can totally throw things. Yeah,
because they're like, I was born at 7 a.m. ish,
I always get nervous when I see a time come through and it's a round number. I mean, yeah, it does happen. I mean, it happens, 1 out of every 60 probably. But I always like to say, well, where did you get this from? Is it from a birth certificate, or did grandma tell you, or what? Because a lot of times people will round up or down. And where that becomes even more problematic, if we don't have an accurate birth time, remember, when we get to those higher vibrations, think of it as us zooming in to certain sections of the chart. And there, a difference of a couple of minutes could totally reconfigure the aspects, because the error of tolerance is so much more minimal when you zoom in at a greater depth. Think of it, a magnifying glass. If you're looking at something very closely and then you move it just a tad, you're looking at something completely different. Well, that's what happens in the higher vibrations. So most of the time, if someone is diligent enough, they can get a birth time. But in those situations where they can't, I'll either do just a more traditional reading for them, or they may opt not to have one, because I really don't like working with an estimated or a guesstimated birth time, and certainly without a birth time. Some astrologers do, but we're all unique, and I don't. So,
yeah, and it's because you're working with data. I used to review medical records,
there
and
you go.
it
Yep.
was really specific on time of death, time that they were extubated, time
Yep.
that they came into the hospital. It was very specific. We had to document that, so I can see from a scientific standpoint that you need that information. And I just wanted to ask, because I have a close friend, and she said, I just don't have my birth time. I don't know. But I like that you gave some suggestions. We can always try to find our birth certificate and see if that's documented on there.
And the hospital, someone said, well, the hospital I was born in was demolished. I said, well, someone had to assume those records. It might be going on a little bit of a scavenger hunt or a treasure hunt, but you can find out most of the time. Now, you're out of luck if you get the hospital certified birth certificate and they didn't mark the time. That does happen sometimes, but usually you can get pretty close. I mean, if you're within 5 or 10 minutes, I'm not going to sweat that. But when you get above 30 minutes, now we're getting loose and free, and that cuts against everything in VA. So, that's, kind of the conundrum there, but the birth time is very, very important. And the reason the location is important, a lot of people aren't aware of, well, why do you need the location? Because your view of the sky when you're born, and that's all an astrological chart is, it's a stamping in of where everything was placed in the sky, including stars, planets, asteroids, and a bunch of other things that aren't the mainstays. That view of the sky is different depending on where you are. If you're in Florida and you're born at 7:02 a.m., you're going to have a completely different view of the sky compared to if you were born in New York. I mean, yeah, the biggies are going to be present, but the angular distances are going to shift around potentially based on where you're located. So that's why all of those three elements are really important for an exact chart calculation.
The guest I had on about Vedic astrology, he talked about geological locational astrology and where you live at a certain point, and how if you move, it shifts things. And that was fascinating in itself. And I think I actually looked up at one time certain ley lines across the grid, and where I was born versus where I am now, and what types of things I could experience when I lived in Florida versus now living in the Pacific Northwest. And it's really fascinating that just those three factors can give you so much information.
Oh, absolutely. And I know some astrologers, that's all they specialize in, is relocation astrology. So they will look at where you came from, where you're living now, where your options are that you've got on the table, and they'll look at all the data and say, all right, well, based on where you're wanting, what you're wanting to accomplish, and what goals you have in place, here's going to be the most energetically balanced location. It really is fascinating how people are amazed to find that you can actually use astrology on pets if you have the time of birth. You can use it for businesses. When I work at, what just kind of amuses me, you'd be amazed at how many business people who would never admit this publicly come to me for consults on what's happening over the next few months here. We're considering an acquisition, but the way we do it for a business is twofold. I always get the birth date, time, and location of the principal owners or managers, whoever's running the show. But then I always say, I need to find the time, and I always use 12 noon. I need to find the date. You need to give me the date that your business was incorporated, because that serves as the birthday. And that's when it came into existence. So then we can look at comparisons between the owner operator against the chart of the business itself, look at the business as to where it's at now. We can do progress charts. It all comes down to, what do you want to know? And I think that's where some people get a little off track. They'll go to an astrologer and say, I want to see what my progressed moon is. Okay, we can do that, but why? Well, I want to know if I'm going to have any money coming up. Well, no, that's not what you use for that. You let the astrologer use the technique to answer the referral question.
Answer the question.
Because certain things you look at for certain situations, and then there are other factors that are more important depending on what's happening and what questions an individual has. So yeah, leave it to the astrologer to use the technique, because I will tell you this, I've been into this for a long time, and I feel like I've barely scratched the surface.
I bet. And Michael, the ancients knew how to do this. The ancients, and we're just, like you said, scratching the surface with this information. Many of us are remembering this information. It's built within us,
Yep.
It's just a matter of, figuring it out. So, how, you're bridging these gaps between the science world and the metaphysical world. And how is this research validating these ancient theories?
Well, what is starting to happen is, as I mentioned before, a lot of this is coming out, and I don't pretend to be a physicist or a quantum mechanics expert, okay, but the whole idea of, and this research just came out not too long ago. And before I answer that, let me mention one other thing. In VA, it's not an either or type of situation. And here's what I mean by that. A lot of times people think, well, if you're into astrology, you can't belong to a faith-based community. Nonsense. Or if you're in a faith-based community, you can't utilize astrology.
Well,
also
the
nonsense.
Vatican uses astrology. I mean, they have a huge.
I know. So the idea is VA incorporates it all: the physical world, the metaphysical world, science, intuition, mysticism. It's all in there. We're here on Earth. However we got here, who knows? We're here, and we got all this stuff in it. So it's not about drawing these lines of demarcation. But anyways, they recently, this was confirmed not too long ago about non-localized particles. I'll do my best to explain this because I'm not a physicist. They did a study where they took these microns, neurons, whatever, where they took them and they split them in half and they put them far apart. I don't know how far, I don't remember, I'd have to go look, but it was a pretty far distance. They applied a stimulus to one particle, which used to be connected to the other one that's in another room or in another city. And they observed that the particle that was separate from where the stimulus was being applied was having the same reaction to the one that was having the stimulus directly applied to it.
Quantum entanglement.
Quantum entanglement. Now that sounds like, all
and
right.
They've done that with twins too, Michael. Yep. They've separated twins and they've still been able to connect in a very powerful way.
Absolutely. So when we start to see things like that, it then gives a lot of credence to, well, gee, maybe Jupiter is doing something to us, even though we can't necessarily feel it. And if everything's connected and we've all got some of this in our chart, it starts to raise the question of, wow, maybe there is something to this. And we're just catching up to the ancients from a scientific perspective. And that's pretty cool. And, I always tell people, I was at a conference recently this past weekend, had nothing to do with astrology. And someone looked at me, and I got the googly eyes, and I'm used to it at this point. You tell someone you're an astrologer, just get ready to be labeled a crackpot. He said, really, Mike, you're into this? I said, I've been into this for 24 years. I'm just, out of the closet, so to speak, over the past few. Okay. He said, really? He said, the thing is, I'm having a hard time here because I trust you and I value your opinion. I said, yeah. I said, that's what I'm banking on. You know me. You know that I am not going to get involved with anything that doesn't check all my, tick all the check boxes. And he was like, I could tell he was shocked a little bit because he didn't realize. And what was funny is he was actually following me on TikTok. And one didn't realize it was me because I don't know how he followed me, but then he well, that is you. I said, yeah, that's me. And it's a mind blower for a lot of people where it's like, oh, okay. But that's cool. I don't try. And I told him, I said, I'm not trying to convince anybody of anything. If people want to come along for the ride, I'm happy to be the tour guide. Because one thing I know, being, a behavioral analyst for all these years, in the study of motivation, is you can't get people to do something they don't want to do. So I'm not trying to make anyone do anything.
It's that cognitive dissonance too, right?
There you go. Well, we're not even going to go to that because that just opens up a whole exploration of why people believe and do, and whatever. All right. So
you're blowing him outside of his comfort zone there.
Exactly. And this, and what's interesting is when people sit with me just in a social situation, and I'm not reading their chart, I'm not giving them any information that's personal to them, and I start to explain this stuff, the response is, that kind of makes sense. But the problem is everyone immediately goes to sun sign default for astrology.
Yeah, what they've learned about it, which is
that's all they know. And this is so not that. And as you see, we've been chatting here for a little while, barely scratched the surface or a thimble full of information. It takes time to explain what's going on. And I'm more than willing to spend the time. But if someone's coming in saying, no, that's nonsense, says, okay, it's nonsense.
Well, and we're very visual too, I think, as humans. We want to see the data, right? We want to prove it. We want to physically see it with our eyes. Yeah,
absolutely. Absolutely. And how was this done? Where did it come from? What process was used? And those are all great questions. And when someone is genuinely curious, that's a lot different than them trying to prove the null hypothesis, which is a fancy statistical term saying, I'm going to do research to prove that something doesn't work. That's not how research works. You start with an idea, which is always a guess in the beginning, and people say, oh, that's anecdotal. All research starts out as anecdotal because you see something. And then we start to apply a standardized research practice around it. And evidence-based practice is what this is grounded in. I don't know if I mentioned this earlier or not. If I'm repeating myself, you can tell I get excited. They use the same stuff in VA as they do in genetic testing and genetic sequencing. Let me bore that out a little bit further. The ideal way to do genetic sequencing would be, let's say they wanted to go find the genetic markers of diabetes. Well, the ideal way to do that is to go and administer genetic sequencing to maybe 10,000 diabetics to see what's going on. Guess what? That doesn't happen. It's not feasible. It's not practical. It's not cost efficient. It doesn't work. You can't, there's not the mechanics of doing that. It's just impossible. So what do? Well, they go and look at super diabetics, people who have real crazy blood sugar, people who are presenting with diabetes where beyond the shadow of a doubt, they meet all the criteria, and they'll find extreme cases of those folks. And then they'll run the genetic sequencing. And they're going to see, are there overlaps or consistencies between these super diabetics, the extreme cases, and the genetic markers? If there are things that start to coalesce, now you start to build the theory. If nothing shakes out, then it's like, well, maybe there isn't a genetic marker, or the ones we sequenced weren't the right ones. So that's the same thing with VA. We look at people who are super whatever, super Aries, super Sun aspect. We look for the extreme cases, because if it's not showing consistent in the extreme cases, there's no way it's going to show consistent when you get down to less intense or less extreme cases.
I can completely understand that. Yeah.
So there's a lot of similarities now in modernist in VA specifically with regards to how the research is done. Stuff is coming in out of physics. In fact, I was at a vibrational astrology conference last March, and there was a physicist in the room.
That's great.
Yeah, I
it was like, I think we're going to start bridging these gaps, and we're going to start seeing maybe even a VA readings, when you apply for a job or these different
we're a long way from that, I can tell you.
But those are things in the future that we could
down the road see. Yeah, maybe. Because I can tell you just from dealing with assessments.
I mean, look at they're doing personality tests whenever I applied for a job.
This is true. And it took a long time for that to get embraced into the workplace. But maybe toward the end of my lifetime, we'll start seeing that. But when you have people at a conference who are not, and I know you don't like the word woo-woo, but that are very academic minded. I mean, I remember people in this conference that we had two people from a higher education. One of them ran a department at an institution. We had a physicist, an astronomer. I'm just trying to think, two preachers. So much for astrology not being able to be used with organized religion. It's like there's this nexus that everything's converging on, and it's very exciting. It's because there's so much to learn from all these disciplines. So why not see what everyone's got to bring to the party?
Yeah, it's like why, energy flows where attention goes. If you're focused in one direction, then of course you're going to see data that supports that, because that's what you are focused on, versus, hey, let's take a look at the other side of the spectrum and let's see how that data changes.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's the fun of it, right? So,
that's the thing. And what I'm probably going to embark upon, and research takes a long time, as you know, but I would like to investigate, are there relationships with personality patterns in assessments, which have statistical validation? There's construct validity, there's criterion validity. I'm not going to get into all that because it's boring. It's, statistics talk. But is there some correlation between extreme scores on personality scales, and do those relate to astrological placements from a VA perspective? It's an idea. I don't know. Maybe there's something there. Maybe there isn't. But the whole idea in VA is we are free to admit when we are wrong. We are not like, well, no, this is the way it's up. No, I mean, and as the research evolves, the theories get tighter and tighter and tighter because there's more data to look at. But we're never about this is the way it is. It's an evolving. Think of it as a stew, where it's always evolving and simmering as it sits on the stove, and hopefully getting better and better as things move forward.
Yeah, and I think like we said, Nikola Tesla, everything's energy, frequency, vibration. I think our knowledge is also based off of what frequency we're at, and as we begin to expand our consciousness, we see things differently, and we're like, we have those aha moments, and we're like, I wasn't looking at that variable. Now let's pull that variable in.
Well, a real basic example that you just, reminded me of is, all right, well, if you choose to see and focus on the negative things, that's all you're going to find. If you see to look and seek out the positive things, that's all you're going to find. And the whole idea of when it's looked at in a research environment, we want to get out all those biases and just let's see what we're dealing with. What do we got? And then we can move from there. And everything is energy. Thought starts as a little electric synapse that's firing from one neuron to another, and then it manifests in action through us, and everything's connected. If someone asked me to summarize everything, it's all connected. We're all connected. The universe is connected. Actions, thoughts, behavior, it's all connected. We're just now at the precipice of beginning to understand how it's all connected. And that's exciting.
It really is. And this has been such a fun conversation. I can't believe this hour has just flown by, Michael.
Well, I'll have to come back because we hardly got into any of
So, like you said, we just skimmed the surface, but I'd like for you to share what your service is. And I know that you have a code for everyone to use if they want to have a consult with you. So
I do. So we're at BlueRidgeAstrology.com, live in the Blue Ridge Mountains. We even have a bear as our little logo there. So BlueRidgeAstrology.com. I'm on all the socials, including TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, same moniker, Blue Ridge Astrology. On TikTok, I do the daily vibrational astrology forecast. So if you want to see what that looks like there, feel free. And of course, that's free, and I interact with folks. If you want to go to the next level, there's a couple of things you can do on our website. I do provide consultations, and I've got a discount code for this podcast, which is TEE, which stands for
The Existential Empath.
There we go. So if you put that in, it'll take off 20% of any personal consultation with me. If you're not ready for a consultation and you want to dip your toe in the astrological waters and you've never experienced this before, I do have a variety of astrological reports they're not vibrational based, but they're good to kind of get you into astrology if you've never experienced that. And you can find those on my site as well, again, at BlueRidgeAstrology.com.
Well, great. Well, Michael, this has been so fun, and thank you for all of your knowledge and wisdom. I learned so much in this show, and I know that those watching and those listening are gonna, their minds might be blown a little bit, kind of like mine was. And I'm not, like you said, most of us know our sun sign, our moon sign, and our rising. That's where I came from. And this last month, I've learned about Vedic and now about vibrational astrology. And so thank you for coming on the show and breaking things down. I feel like this was a good show where you made it very easy for us to kind of swallow.
I'll let you in. I'll let you in a little secret as we're wrapping up here. That's because, admittedly, I'm a slow learner. So I've got to be able to learn things in a way that I understand it. And I know then when I'm explaining it to others, I just go through the same process of when I was learning that knowledge, because it's very frustrating when I've had teachers just in school or graduate school or wherever, where they move so quick and they don't explain the concept. So I appreciate the feedback there. I'm hoping it was accessible for everyone. That's the goal.
It was. And because I think things like astrology, for me, I had my other guests share, what does the house mean? What does, a transit mean? What is this? So you broke that down, and I appreciate that. And I know for those out there, some people who are into astrology may think this is kindergarten. And then there's other ones. For me, I was like, that was a graduate class, so
well,
thank you very much.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
You deserve to navigate your life in alignment with health, happiness, and abundance. To learn more about the services that I provide, including Beyond Quantum Healing Hypnosis, EFT tapping, and the Emotion Code, visit my website at www.theexistentialempath.com.